They've captured the look of these diminutive prototypes really well, and certainly it will take pride of place on Mynydde Tatus. Hi there everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jennifer Kirk, welcoming you up here to the loft on Weir Yard. It's great to see you. I hope I find you well. Now today we're going to be taking a look at the Peco-Kato collaboration. This is the Small England locomotive that they announced quite some time ago, and certainly whilst Kato is well known for North American and Japanese outline models, they're not so well known here in the UK, but they are starting to make some inroads. But for Peco, this is the first time that they've tackled a ready-to-run locomotive, although they have done body kits in the past for 009 and 016.5 prototypes. So I'm really excited to take a look and see what their first ready-to-run offering has on the table. This locomotive actually is selling out really quickly. There's two different versions with ostensibly the same livery, but either as Prince or Princess, two of the three surviving Small Englands on the Festiniog Railway. They're also offering a ready-to-run chassis too, which you can then buy and use underneath your own bodies. So a really great boon for the scratch builder and kit builder too. But without further ado, and in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories, and also with additional support from KR Models, who dare to build the models that you want to see on your model railway. I'm really excited to take a good close look at this Peco-Kato Small England locomotive. When Peco and Kato announced their collaboration for the Small England locomotive, it really did come as a little bit of a surprise, not least because we had a third manufacturer entering the fray for ready-to-run 009 locomotives, where so recently 009 had really been the domain of the serious kit builder and scratch builder. I think it was also the case that it was an unknown quantity as to how they could get these small locomotives to actually work reliably. But with the partnership of Kato, it did bring with it an awful lot of experience producing locomotives for either Japanese or US outline prototypes. So Kato are no strangers to making locomotives, and being that they predominantly supply N-gauge, they are also no strangers to what it's needed to do to make a small locomotive such as this go through its paces. The box itself is quite an unusual design, and you can see here that I bought this through Rails of Sheffield. Now, one of the things I will say about these is that I initially started seeing a lot of reports of models arriving damaged. Now, hats off to Peco, they very quickly put out a statement to say that they'd become aware that a lot of models had been damaged in transit and set up a process whereby you could get the models repaired, free of charge of course because they're under warranty, but very quickly and hassle-free, either through the original retailer that you purchased them from, or indeed by sending them direct to Peco for remedial work. And certainly when I've spoken to Peco, they said that the design of the packaging is definitely under review for any future releases, so hopefully we're not going to see that repeated. The box itself, quite easy to open up, but then one thing that did surprise me a little bit is that the inlay is very reminiscent of locomotive boxes in the 1990s, and it does strike me that polystyrene is something of a retrograde step, and I would like to think that Peco are already on the case with this, and next time round we'll see them in a much more sustainable style packaging, and one which does protect them a little bit more in transit. As you can see, there's a lot of freedom for it to move inside here. We also get some additional grab rails on a sprue and some N-gauge style couplings, which are a direct fit into the sockets at either end if you want to run this on an N-gauge layout with N-gauge stock, which is a nice interesting little touch, and certainly I could imagine for the Japanese market, which Kato will be marketing these to, that is an essential. Now, you've probably already spotted that this has been DCC fitted by me, and I will talk a little bit about this later on. But out of the box, this model is not DCC ready in any way. And this came as a little bit of a surprise because we've become used to DCC sockets on ready-to-run locomotives, including in 009, and this is the first that has turned up without that provision as standard. And I'm guessing that this is the influence of Kato, because believe it or not, in the Japanese market, they're still very much DC modelers. And that surprised me because I would have thought that the Japanese would have loved all of the additional features that DCC would bring with it, but it seems that's not the case. And I would hope that any future production runs of these, that a DCC socket would be considered. So we've got a little bit of information here about the detail parts that I showed you, the grab irons, where they need to go. Also shows you how to change out the couplings should you need to. And that's pretty much it. There is no mention of DCC at all. It's just not there. The locomotive is not DCC ready. But there's not even any clues as to how to get the body apart to be able to do that, which for me was a little bit of a surprise. The locomotive itself is a coloured plastic finish. The only decoration on this is the printing of the lining. So we've got a little bit of a shine going on here, and it's an area where I really think that painted plastic would have looked a little bit better. Although I have seen these weathered up, and they do very quickly come alive with a very, very light weathering, which just tones down that glossy finish and makes the locomotive look used. There is some really, really quite intricate detail. These whistles, factory fitted here, are really, really nice and actually quite resilient. They've captured this intricate shape of the Small England cab really, really well, even down to this very narrow doorway on the back that leads out to the tender. I'm particularly impressed by this connection between the tender and the locomotive, because this is something that actually is it's just a clip fit. So I can pull these apart and you can see that the tender comes off, but it does still allow the power pickup from the tender to go into the locomotive through this drawbar setup. So you can just see there we've got some very slender metal spring clips on top, and that actually does do a very, very good job. The tender has quite a weight in it, which does mean that actually I found that the locomotive would run quite happily if you lifted it off the track and just relied on the tender for current collection. And that's probably quite helpful because the locomotive itself comes with traction tyres on the rear axle and an ordinary axle at the front. And I believe it does pick up the power from the front axle quite well, but it does need this tender just to give it a helping hand. Interestingly enough, if you buy the chassis only, which Peco do sell for your scratch building projects, these don't come with the traction tyres on the back, which has been foxing a few people, and certainly I think I'm not convinced that it really needs the traction tyres. Certainly when it came to running this, despite its small size, there is a reasonable amount of weight here, and I found that it really didn't struggle in the slightest, even with very, very long trains, and I'm not entirely convinced that traction tyres are wholly necessary. On the rest of the printing, we've got the Princess nameplate on there, ostensibly one of the few detail differences between Prince and Princess. They've captured the look of these diminutive prototypes really, really well. We've got number 1 there on the front buffer beam, although these don't actually have buffers, and the detail on that smokebox door is really nice, with the separately applied smokebox wheel and the handrails on there too. We've also got quite a lot of additional detail, so these are quite rich on additional parts. The funnel there as well looks pretty good, and then we've got the row of rivets across the top of the tank, which presumably also really, really helpfully hide any parting lines from the mould. The cab itself is just a clip-on lift-off. Now I'm not going to remove it because I had a huge job to DCC fit this, and the cab is now semi-permanently fixed by virtue of where the wiring from the decoder passes through. Inside the locomotive, again, I can't really show you this because the DCC fitting process was really quite total. I did test run this on DC, and the locomotive did run incredibly well. And again, with those traction tyres and the pickups across the tender and locomotive, there really was no struggle with the running. On DCC though, I resorted to using the Dula and Haas decoder, the micro-sized decoder, one of the smallest on the market, and I got that through our sponsor Tram Fabrique, who are the UK and European distributors for Trainer-O-Matic decoders. This decoder comes in two different types. You can either have the 6-pin direct plug or ones with a wire loom. Now, with hindsight, I should have gone for the one with the wire loom, and it may well have fitted quite neatly in the tiniest of spaces that was available above the chassis block. However, I chose to wire in a wiring loom and plug that decoder direct to it, thinking that this might be a simpler way of doing it. It was actually anything but even so, I did manage to do it, and I have heard of people even managing to fit Stay Alives and DCC sound, although I'm still not quite clear how they managed that. Overall, the model is a really good representation of the Small England. Its running qualities are superb. The motor that's in here really is quite tiny, but they've taken the opportunity to stuff that boiler and water tank with as much weight as they can. There's also a really nice heavy brass worm and a gear chain, and I found the locomotive incredibly controllable. The side rods and cross slides here as well are really slender and do look the part, and all in all, I think that this is a really good fist from Peco and Kato at their very first ready-to-run locomotive, and it'll be interesting to see what they bring forthcoming to the market. They did announce that they were going to take on the double fairly. However, with another manufacturer having brought out their version first, it's not clear at the moment whether that will still go ahead or whether it's likely to fall by the by. However, some of the other locomotives in the Festiniog Railway fleet may well be perfect follow-ons, and certainly the larger Englands would only require a new body to fit on this pre-existing chassis, and even the tender being able to be reused, with the differences being contained entirely within the body on the top of that chassis. There's also Linda and Blanche, and that opens the door to a number of other locomotives such as the single fairlies, which could also be produced, not just Taliesin, but the ones that originally were built and operated on the North Wales narrow gauge railways. On DCC, I eventually got this locomotive up and running, and it has performed faultlessly on my NCE controller, so I've been very pleased with that. It was a very sure-footed locomotive, and the additional pickups in the tender really did go a long way to make it work so well. Those traction tyres and the heavy weight in the boiler and the water tanks ensured that it could pull a prototypically very long train. We've also got a nice representation on the tender of the crest, and it'll be interesting to see how that fares under close magnification. Additionally, on the sides of the cab, we have got a correct number plate there, Festiniog Railway number 1, and then we've got the Boston Lodge Works plate. The rest of the printing is straight and true, and really there's no issues whatsoever with the decoration on this model. It's really well done, and everything is exactly where it needs to be. One of the things that I do get asked about a lot is changing the default couplings on 009 for something else. And I'm going to take this opportunity with the Small England to just show you a couple of the alternatives on the market. And the first one of these comes from Tram Fabrique, and we've got a link for these in the description box down below. And you can see here, these are actually designed for working with any of the Kato chassis. So if you're also using Kato motor bogies, which come with these type couplings, which I'm going to show you there, the standard N-gauge type couplings, then it's really, really easy to get these changed out for these direct like-for-like replacements coming from Tram-Fabrique. Now, they've very, very kindly sent over a set of these just to show you how easy they are to fit. Now, they just come on the backing card. You actually get quite a few in a set for these, so there's enough for 5 different items of rolling stock. Although you can also make them go a little bit further, because things like brake vans or indeed a locomotive at the front of a train doesn't, strictly speaking, need the coupling on the front. So it's a great way of maybe eking these out across 6 items of rolling stock. Now, the actual pieces that come here, they're moulded on a sprue, and it's really quite easy to separate these out. As you see from the description there, and they do actually also come with some paperwork too, which show you how to remove the default couplings and replace them with these. So if you want to fit them with a firm fit, just trim a little bit extra onto it, or if you want them with some play left and right, really good for 009 layouts which have very tight curves, you can trim the sprue all the way back to the box. And for this, I'm actually going to use my sprue cutters. So I've just got these here, and I'm going to try them both ways. So I'm just going to very, very quickly remove one for a loose fit, and I'm going to fit another one with a slightly tighter fit. Now we might need to just trim them a little bit more. Now the original Arnold type couplings that are on the front here, they're really easy to get out. They come pre-fitted in a clip-in box, so it's just simply a case of removing the N-gauge coupling and then putting in its place, making sure you get it the right way up. So with the little hook uppermost, this just goes into here, and just make sure it goes in all the way. And I do like the fact that these are supplied in a kind of a matte black. There's no plastic shine to them, which is really, really great. And then we just clip the whole assembly back in. Bit of firm pressure to get those clips to engage, and there you have a perfect replacement for the Kato style couplings. And these then just very, very readily will hook up to the standard 009 couplings, and you can see you get a good positive hook on these. So as you can see, if you're using the Kato motor bogies in your builds, these are the perfect way to give the end model the perfect HOE or 009 style couplings without any messing about, with no need to glue any adaptions in place. It's just a straight like-for-like replacement. The second couplings that I want to show you, which again, these are useful if you want to run your trains in fixed rakes and just want to let them run without needing to do any shunting. Then the other alternative is the Hunt Coupling Elite from West Hill Wagon Works. And we've got a set here. Again, these are designed for N-gauge, but are also perfectly suitable for 009. And with these you do get a fair old selection. This is the starter pack, which gives some various lengths, and as you can see there, they're all lined up with the magnets, and it's just simply a case of picking the appropriate pair, and then the 009 couplings just pull out, and these clip in their place, the other end out. And then you've got magnetic couplings at either end, and these aren't handed, so it doesn't matter about which way round your locomotive or rolling stock are, they'll just buffer up and stick together with the magnetic attraction. You just need to make sure that when you're adding these to your locomotive or rolling stock that they're the right way up. If you put them on the wrong way up, and I'll just show you with one of these spare pieces, then that is the correct way up. But if you get them the wrong way up, they will try and stick side to side like that and won't actually go together. So it's just a little bit of something to keep an eye on. And if you do get them the wrong way up, it's just simply a case of pulling them out and then turning them the other way up. So we also have a link down below for the Hunt Coupling Elite from West Hill Wagon Works, and certainly if you're a fan of magnetic couplings, then these are the perfect starting point for 009 models. So we come now to the scores. First up is build quality. And I have to say here that whilst I know a lot of people may be typing in the comments about it arriving damaged for them, this is something that Peco has owned up to and is pulling out all the stops to make amends. And certainly I think that this is down to circumstances beyond their control at the factory, where these have been packaged with a rather strange choice of box. So really, I don't think that's anything to do with the build quality of the locomotive. One of the things though is that the locomotive body and cab do tend to drift upwards if you're not careful in clipping them on properly in the first place, and it can be a little bit difficult to just get them aligned and reassembled if you do take the body off the chassis, for example for DCC fitting. So I'm going to give this an 8.4. When it comes to running quality, this really is this locomotive's chance to shine. It really did run well, those additional pickups in the tender working wonders. The heavy weight in the locomotive, coupled with that single axle traction tyres, meant that this was an unstoppable force. And actually, I ran out of wagons long before this ran out of pulling power, with no sign of any slippage. Although I do have a little bit of a concern over use of traction tyres, it remains to be seen how this pans out over the lifespan of the locomotive. But certainly, I know a lot of people have commented that the standalone chassis version doesn't feature those traction tyres and does seem to be preferred. So it'll be interesting to see how Peco adapts to feedback when the next production run comes through. I have actually talked with Peco and they're saying possibly 2023, and it would be nice to see Palmerston turn up, as well as some of the Festiniog Railway green liveries that these have carried over their lifespan. But I'm going to give this a 9.9 for that running quality, because I really did think that it was pretty well done. On DCC fitting and innovation, well, straight off the bat, there is no provision for DCC fitting. Indeed, it does feel at times like it's been made very difficult for even hardwiring of DCC. I did have to resort to a little bit of surgery to the front of the cab to be able to get wires through to put a 6-pin socket into the cab. It's not the neatest of constructions, but certainly when I do get a Festiniog crew, it will become much easier to hide that. And actually, the inside of the cab is just a little bit Spartan anyway, so I think it's no bad thing to add a crew to this locomotive. So unfortunately, it does lose a lot of points on the DCC fitting side of things. When it comes to innovation, I really do like this tender drawbar that couples the tender to the locomotive and allows that additional current pickup, but at the same time is very easy to separate, which does make this a doddle for maintenance. And actually, it's such a simple system, you do wonder why nobody thought of something like this before. There's no risk of the coupling pulling apart whilst pulling a train. It is actually quite nicely and firmly done, and it's really easy to get back positively first time every time. So it's certainly something that, as a takeaway from this model, I'm really quite impressed at. The chassis and the connecting rods as well are really nicely done. But again, we're coming back to that DCC fitting, or lack thereof, which has really dragged the score down. Of course, it has to be said, if you're a DC modeler, none of that matters, so take of this as you will. And I'm going to give this a 4.2, but it has to be added that it lost 5 points for having no facility either for DCC ready or an ease of hardwiring the decoder into there. When it comes to accuracy and quality of finish, the accuracy is really good. They have captured the look of this diminutive prototype so well, and I don't really have any issues with that. The only area that was a little bit of a disappointment was the use of self-coloured plastic for the body, which gives this slightly plasticky shine, and I do feel that this model would really be brought alive by a painted finish onto this plastic, and maybe this is something that Peco and Kato could consider for a follow-on run. Certainly I think it would drastically improve the look of this already special locomotive. So I'm going to give this a 7.9. On value for money, these seem to be universally available at a price tag of £135, which in the grand scheme of things is certainly in the ballpark for a locomotive of this size. It really is quite small, and as you can see, it just fits onto the palm of my hand. One of the other things that I found is if you take something like the 22-ton plate wagon from Bachmann, this makes an ideal load and is still, miraculously enough, within the loading gauge of 00, so when not in use on an 009 layout, this is a perfect way to make use of your locomotive. Overall, I think it does offer pretty good value for money, notwithstanding that not being DCC ready, and it would have been so simple for a 6-pin plug with a blanking plate to have been added in there just to make things a little bit easier, because at the end of the day, a DCC ready locomotive works just fine on DC, but it makes the life of the many DCC modelers a whole lot easier. So I give this an 8.5 on value for money, and that gives us an overall score of 37.9. But do bear in mind that it lost 5 points for the DCC fitting, and if you're a DC modeler or you're very much into your surgery of the chassis for doing a hardwired installation, then that doesn't really matter. Overall, I can still wholeheartedly recommend this model, and certainly it will take pride of place on Mynydde Tatus. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video, and I'd really love to hear from you and your thoughts in the comments section down below. Do you agree with my findings on this, or do you disagree? Again, I'd love to hear from you, and it's great to get a fully rounded picture of what the public at large think of this model. Also, don't forget to tickle that like button, share this video, and also subscribe to the channel to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. And you can also head on over to Patreon to help support the channel to keep making the videos that you want to see. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. And until then, take care, happy modelling, bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Train-O-Matic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. Additional support is also provided by KR Models, daring to build the models that you want to see on your layout. Check out their website today and see some of their award-winning models, as well as their forthcoming masterpieces in miniature. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, Alan Dickerson, Eddie Popper, Karen Nicol, Medwin Williams, Crossways Point Junction, 3B Rail, and Jennifer Garrett. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.